So, Nemesis. Is it good? Is it bad? Maybe a little early to say, but I'd say my initial impression has been very positive, although not groundbreaking. Overall, I think this expansion made things complicated. Much more complicated than they used to be, at least. A ton of features shaking up the meta, and let's go over some of my first observations of the features in the game, and let's make a quick review. So, the espionage system. While awesome at the start, it feels kind of overrated because it is expensive until mid-game to run most of the operations, and a lot of the operations are not very explanatory as to what they do. I mean, 400 energy, no, actually 900 energy for just information. Not to mention, you gain information on your target simply by keeping your agent there, and running that operation still does not allow you to look at their fleets. So as far as I can see, there is no point to that operation, and if there is an operation that lets you, say, get one-sided sensor link, then that would have been different. Stealing tech for 1600, and mind you, I have not had it succeed as of yet. Sure, maybe towards mid to late game if you're having some kind of a cold war. In those cases, this could be quite interesting, but otherwise, if it is a more competitive game, you might just be better off just attacking and taking it. This is all fine, but the information part needs some more balancing. The information gathering operation, yeah, try saying that 3 times, should be a little bit more explained what it does and what it can do. Or perhaps not let the information to be gained on its own, so that way that operation is worth it, or maybe make a discount so we're always considering the espionage part of the game. Envoys, thanks to this system, are actually much more valuable, so that is a big plus. On overall, my impression of this is somewhat mixed, of this espionage system is somewhat mixed, but leaning towards positive. The balance changes have been most welcome. The new population system, while made the population system a bit more complex, made it much more logical. You still get better growth by colonization, but it is no longer the main source of your growth. The slavery received a much needed nerf, but is still very strong. Void Dwellers got nerfed, Necroliths got indirectly nerfed, and a small direct change because you no longer need the pops for build slots, and your primitives can only be 8 to 9 pops. So no 19 pop primitive worlds like in the old days. This so as not to give you a huge edge in the early game, which was the biggest problem with them. You still deal with interstellar culture, so not much changes there. Prosperous Unification got nerfed. The production buff you got on your homeworld now expires after 10 years. Ring worlds have been nerfed on paper, but have been buffed in other ways, so they're still very much overpowered. Ring world with 45 pops, just to give you a rough idea, during our tests, a ring world with 45 pops had more science and alloy production than a 65 pop player, so this is just to give you an idea. In general, while meta has been shaking up, it is still settling in and looks like on the shoulders of giants, remnants, etc., which were considered like second tier origins, are now considered among the top tier, considering the ring world will most likely be banned. Necroliths, I'm still not sure on its situation. That's one of my favorite builds, and by the way, the Necrolith is named after Necroid Lithoid builds, and is indeed a top contender. It effectively becomes a better version of the standard organic build, and has also been made more consistent with having only 8 to 9 pops in the guaranteed worlds. Let's talk about the new Become the Crisis and Custodian options, and those are more for late game and seem to be very strong, especially Crisis, and is quite often open to exploits by, let's say, vassalizing and releasing a person, and a lot of things like that. Forming the Imperium requires the person to pretty much be a crisis in their own right, and seems like a roundabout way of conquering everyone without even actually doing that. The diplomatic issues can be created through espionage. This brings RP and mechanics closer together, as well as other options in the espionage system, so this was the thing that I was looking forward to the most. because this is why I've even played RP games to begin with, to bring the game's mechanics closer to reality, to what you can do in outside of the game with communications, diplomacy, and a bit of espionage. This serves to create a much more complete game for the multiplayer and single player. So espionage becomes a much bigger tool in a game that is in a state of Cold War, which is quite exciting and was something that was much needed. The whole Become the Crisis thing is a lot of fun. It's quite a late game addition, and by that point the game is still already kind of decided, and I think it needs some fine-tuning, but I think it hits its mark. It provides a late game tension in the games where there really isn't one, and where the things are balanced. With all that said, the latest changes may not seem all positive, but when you get used to them after a couple of sessions, they become quite intuitive. This whole expansion is very smartly made. Paradox has actually delivered on their promise and has actually made a game that is deep and complex, and has something for all types of strategy players without throwing what was established out the window. All in all, this was a great expansion that was worth the purchase, and I consider this a must-buy. Well, that's what I had on Nemesis. Now if you'll excuse me, I've got schemes to attend to.